Hello and welcome back to my garden. In this video, I am going to be documenting my autumn season for 2024, which means I'm carrying on with my documentation of my gardening journey. Starting off with flowers, my dahlias were still blooming. So these are both the dahlias that were in the raised bed as well as the dahlias that were in the ground. They all looked beautiful, and at this point they had been blooming since at least May. So I definitely recommend dahlias if you're looking for a hard-working flower, something that will flower throughout most of the year really. The thing with dahlias though, you do need to deadhead them, which means you need to remove the spent blooms, and I think that helps in you getting even more fresher flowers. I also had alyssum, which is really pretty. So with alyssum, they have these tiny white flowers, as you can see, and it can look like a carpet of blooms, and it just looked amazing. The one I usually grow is white, but I think somehow I had some seeds which had some purpley and pinky colors, but all in all, it looked absolutely wonderful. My geraniums were also still blooming, just about blooming, but they were coming to the end of their cycle. So geraniums, also known as pelargoniums, they are mostly sun-loving, heat-loving plants. So you can plant them in pots or in the ground and just put them somewhere where it gets about 6 to 8 hours of sun, and they usually do very well. Just this last year, I had them at the front, in my front border, at the front of my house, and they bloomed the whole season. I would definitely recommend them, but like dahlias, they also need to be deadheaded. So that's something to keep on top of if you decide to plant geraniums. At this point, I'd also planted my violas and they were blooming. So my violas actually bloom from around October, November time, all the way to May, usually in my garden. I would also recommend them if you want a long flowering plant. The primroses that I'd placed in my raised beds, they were showing some signs of flowers, and again, primroses, another plant that will flower through winter all the way till about March, April time. I would definitely recommend primroses as well. Autumn is a good season to get discounted plants from the garden center or other stores that sell plants. This is particularly because most of them will be clearing their stock, so there is usually quite a few bargains to be had. So in my case, I actually bought some new plants for my garden. So I bought some salvia, some hot lips. So there are different types of salvia hot lips. The ones I knew of were red and white, but these ones were purpley in color. So that was quite interesting. I did like the purple. I think it goes better with the color scheme in my garden. So I bought the salvia, 3 lots of salvia. I also bought some verbena, and I think at the time it was only the one I bought, and it did succeed even because I had it the next year. The 3 salvias and the verbena, all in all, I think they were £10 for 4 plants. So as I said, autumn, wonderful time to go shopping. In addition to adding new plants, it's also important in autumn to start preparing for the winter. So for me in my garden, this means protecting the plants that I have. My azaleas were in terracotta containers, and terracotta is not frost proof generally. Generally, they're not frost proof because they are porous and they're able to absorb moisture, which then expands upon freezing. And when it expands, it can cause cracking. I personally have not experienced it directly because I do protect my containers, my pots. However, I remember when I first moved to my house, there was a gorgeous container which was terracotta, but I think it had been left outside and it had cracked. Oh, it was such a shame because it was such a beautiful container. I did think of mending it, but it didn't seem like it could be mended. So I ended up just using it, breaking it up and using it at the bottom of my containers. But anyway, going back to protecting plants is really important to protect both the plants and the plant pots. So for my azalea, as I said, they were in terracotta. So I generally wrapped blue bubble wrap at the base, and that seemed to protect them. I also dug up my dahlias. So these are the dahlias that were in the raised bed. I dug them up on the 14th of November to store them in the house. And I've mentioned this in previous videos that I actually store my dahlias in shredded paper. And generally they do quite well. I think I get about, I don't know, 50-60% success rate in storing them that way. So I did protect my dahlias by digging them up and storing them in the house. I also put the three salvias I'd bought into the raised bed whilst still in their containers. I didn't know much about hot lips or salvia. These were my first salvias. So I just thought there's no harm in putting them in the raised bed and then covering them up, giving them a bit more protection, the roots a bit of protection. I also want to quickly mention my heuchras. So while I was busy protecting things and trying to preserve my plants, unfortunately the dark colored heuchras that I had bought the previous season did not make it. So they had initially been planted on the right, so they were all dark, and then I had the lighter colored marmalade one in the same container. But then, so they were planted on the right. One day I went into the garden, it had been a bit windy. I found the foliage for my heuchras on the left. It turned out that something had eaten their roots. So then they were left without any roots. And when the wind blew, they ended up on the left of the garden. It was quite sad. But yeah, that's what happened to my dark colored heuchras. I haven't bought any other dark colored heuchras since then. I've kept the light colored ones and they do brilliantly in my garden. So, whatever it is that ate the roots, it somehow does not eat the roots of the lighter colored or the marmalade heuchras. Because, as I said, the marmalade heuchras were in the same container as the dark colored ones, yet it was only the roots for the dark colored ones that were eaten. So, yeah, that was quite interesting. In terms of vegetable planting, I planted garlic in my raised beds. This time I did it a bit differently because previously I had planted my garlic in November, around the mid of November. This time I decided to trial planting them a bit earlier. So I wanted to plant my garlic a bit earlier, but just in case it didn't work, I also wanted to plant my garlic around the usual time. So I ended up having two plantings of garlic. The first one was the first weekend in October, and then the second one was on the 26th of November. So the first ones I planted them in the first raised bed, that's the raised bed closest to the house. And then the second planting was in the back raised bed. Autumn is also a wonderful time to plan your garden out, partly because things will be dying back and you'll be pulling out, for example, old tomatoes, old sweet corn stalks, and so it gives you a better understanding of the layout of your garden. So it's a fabulous time to plan ahead. In this particular autumn season, I actually made a decision to remove my raised trough bed. I bought my raised trough bed way before I even got the raised beds that are in the ground. So I bought it and I'd put it at the side of the garden. And since then, I'd been growing mostly my lettuce and my spinach, some onions, and once or twice I'd grown potatoes in there. Unfortunately, where it was located, I wasn't getting that much sun, so I couldn't plant sun loving vegetables or sun loving flowers in that trough. I made a decision that I was going to move the trough and just embrace the shade on the right side of the garden. So I decided that I was just going to buy some shade loving plants. This was another wonderful season in the garden. Even though we had some challenges earlier in the year with the aphids, with the slugs and the snails, because we had a very, very wet spring, all in all, it was another enjoyable gardening year. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.